8 years after being wrongfully accused, my father wants me back, but after all the pain, can I ever forgive him for believing her lies? My dad kicked me out because my stepmom falsely accused me of stealing my stepsister's college savings. Because my stepmother had falsely accused me of stealing my stepsister's college savings, my father expelled me from the house. In light of the fact that many individuals have critiqued my response, I am in need of information regarding whether or not I responded appropriately to my estranged father's recent contact with me. My relationship with him has been strained for the past 8 years, and we have not been on speaking terms. After I had just graduated from college, he kicked me out of the house when I was 21 years old. A few months passed during which I was living with my family, until I started working and eventually saved up enough money to move out on my own. At the age of 7, my parents went through a divorce, and when I became 17, my father began a relationship with my stepmother, Becca. Additionally, Becca had been married in the past. However, sadly, her spouse had passed away 6 years before the time that she began dating my father. Additionally, she had a daughter from a prior relationship, and her name was Alexa, and she was my stepsister, and she was 4 years younger than I was. I had a pretty strange feeling about Becca and Alexa when it seemed as though they were not pleased to have the opportunity to meet me. I didn't give it much attention because I believed it was possible that they were just shy. In spite of this, I found that the more time I spent with them, the less I believed they liked me. Not only did Becca and Alexa move in with us after a year of dating, but that was also the year that I moved out to complete my undergraduate education. When I was at home, I didn't spend a lot of time with them. Only when I returned home for the holidays would I have the opportunity to spend time with my family. Whenever I returned, they would behave in a really peculiar manner when they were near me. Despite the fact that they were married when I was in my second year of college, they did not appear to have any feelings for me on any level. It was as if they did not appreciate my presence, and they appeared to be more happy when it was just them and my father. I am not sure how to put it into words exactly, but it would appear that they did not like my presence. Because I didn't want to be living in a household where I was constantly made to feel unwelcome. I decided to have a conversation with my father about this matter, after I had graduated and moved back in with the idea of staying at home, in order to save some money before moving out permanently. However, when I brought it up with him, he told me that I was simply making it up, and that Becca and Alexa loved me far more than I thought they did. I made the decision to put my faith in what he was going to say and moved back in. Nevertheless, within a couple of weeks he was shown to be incorrect. There is no doubt that they did not love me. In fact, they detested the presence of someone like me in their lives. Becca never showed any sign of warmth toward me, and just occasionally acknowledged my existence. It appeared as though Alexa had a grudge against me, as she was persistently attempting to irritate me and pick arguments with me, for no apparent reason. It was something that I brought up with my father on a few occasions, but due to the fact that their conduct around him was totally different, he believed that I was exaggerating the problem, and that they were most likely simply growing used to having me around. This continued for a couple of months, and despite my best efforts to steer clear of them, they continued to make my life more challenging than it already was. I even stopped whining to my father about it at some point, since I realized there was no purpose in continuing to do so. The only thing I wanted was to put away enough money so that I could finally move out. Becca and Alexa framed me for stealing Alexa's college savings, which has resulted in my being tossed out of my home in a manner that was rather rudely performed. Becca and Alexa were driving me crazy, and I really wanted to move out as soon as possible. One day, around midday, I left the house to go house searching with a number of my friends. I was looking for a new place to live, because those two were driving me crazy. After I returned home in the evening, I saw that my father had already arrived. As soon as I walked into the house, he gave me the expression of being highly dissatisfied and instructed me to gather my belongings and go. The fact that I was unaware of what was taking place caused me to be taken aback. I asked him what was going on, and he responded by saying that he had never anticipated that I would turn out to be such a hopeless and desperate lowlife. He never imagined that I would go to such lengths for the sole purpose of obtaining financial gain. Despite the fact that I had no idea what he was talking about, tears began to well up in my eyes, since the things that he was saying were so judgmental. Instead of making an effort to communicate with me, he informed me that he was unable to spare any time for my performance, and required me to depart without delay. Following that, Becca entered the room and immediately began yelling at me for destroying Alexa's hopes as means. It was her assertion that I had done all of this because I was unable to bear the realization that my father had finally moved on with his life. During the time that she was yelling at me about what I was supposed to have done, I was able to piece together the scenario. On the surface, it seemed as though they were accusing me of stealing money from them, specifically a car that they had provided me for unexpected expenses, but that I had instead utilized to make expensive dollars more expensive. Becca stated that I had approached her a few weeks earlier, stating that I was running out of money, and as a result, she had added me to account where she had stored money for Abidjanpul and Majors, Nevertheless, I had almost completely depleted the account, such that there was no money left over for Alexa's college expenses. The money that she had set aside for her daughter was used to purchase a number of new bags, shoes and garments from high-end brands. It appears that I had lied about the reason I required the money and utilized it to purchase these items. Due to the fact that none of this had actually taken place, I was completely shocked, and she was lying through her teeth. Despite the fact that I requested that she provide me with evidence to back up all of this, my father informed me that there was no need to do so, because they had already searched through my room a couple of hours ago and discovered all they required to validate her abode. He claimed that he had discovered all of the stuff that had been purchased with that cased in away under my bed in a covert mat. When I told my father that Becca had never even added me to the card, he informed me that she had removed me after receiving a phone call from the bank that morning. This was because I would have known if she had added me to the card. Although it had taken a few hours to complete, it was over now. In response to my request that he call the bank authorities to verify this information, he informed me that he did not require any other evidence to be aware of the fact that his daughter was a thief and a repulsive individual. In spite of the fact that I exerted a great deal of effort to persuade him that Bill Swizga was lying, he did not trust me. At some point I was forced to depart. Following that day I did not communicate with my father in any way. He had demonstrated to me the things that were most important to him, and after the manner in which I had been insulted, I had no desire to communicate with him ever again. After moving into my first apartment, I stayed with a buddy for a few days before moving in here. There were a few months in which I had a difficult time making ends meet, but after that I was able to make it on my own. At this point in my life, I am living a really wonderful life, and I even have plans to purchase my own home within the next few months. Over the course of 8 years, I have not had any kind of communication with my father, and I have avoided every family gathering that involves his side of the family, like the plague, because I have never wanted to really meet him. We have maintained communication with one another, and my mother had severed her sub-relationship with my father at the same time that I did. This was due to the manner in which he had treated me. However, at this moment she appears to be taking his side, which is the reason why I am perplexed. It was a few days ago when my father made his appearance at my residence. Because I was quite interested in hearing what he had to say, I decided to open the door and talk to him on the phone. The address was reportedly obtained by him from my mother, as he informed me. But it was only lately that he discovered that my stepmother had fabricated the entire situation. And he stated that he was there to apologize to me for all that had happened previously. Alexa's education fund was something that she had hoped someone would pay for. She had been taking advantage of him for his money for a number of years, and he was completely unaware of it because he believed that he was only providing for his family. He wanted me to forgive him and give him a chance after he had just learned something from his in-laws. Or he wanted me to give him a chance. It would appear that Becca and her parents had a disagreement a few months ago, and they had lately contacted my father in order to inform him of the facts of the incident that led to my expulsion from the house. She had purchased all of those items for herself and her daughter, but she had strategically placed them in my room in order to frame me and give the impression that I was concealing some. This was exactly what I had expected. She even had her parents phone her pretending to be bank personnel in order to convince my father that she had in fact added me to the card. This was done only for the purpose of protecting her reputation. The actual reason she had done all of this was because she was the one who had used the college fund that her late husband had left for Alexa to pay for her education. She had done this by living a lavish lifestyle. In order to avoid giving the impression that she was a gold digger, she refrained from approaching my father with the request to pay for her costs. The fact that she believed my relationship with my father was going to stand in the way of their relationship was another reason why she detested me. Because of this, she had always had a negative opinion of me. That is how she came up with that plan, to get rid of me and to create a circumstance in which my father would be forced to offer to pay for Alex's college expenses. On account of the fact that the plan was successful, she was able to accomplish 2 goals at once. During the course of 8 years, her parents had remained silent. On the other hand, as a result of their argument, they recently came to the conclusion that it was finally time to unearth some ancient bones and reveal the truth to my father. He disclosed to me that he had already initiated the process of filing for divorce from her a couple of weeks prior, with the assistance of his previous attorney. At this point he had arrived to make amends with me. In his statement he mentioned that he was aware that one of my friend's fathers was a well-known divorce attorney. He then requested that I perform my responsibility as his daughter by putting him in contact with my friend's father. A petition that was ridiculously biased in favor of one party had been drafted by Becca and her attorney. A second thing that my father asked me to do was to find a lawyer who would be willing to reduce his fees for him. As a result of the absurd nature of the situation, I ended up laughing in his face before I closed the door. It was hard for me to come up with the idea that he truly thought he could just drop by, apologize, and then ask for my assistance, expecting that everything would be normal again immediately. Clearly I was not going to be of any assistance to him in any manner, shape or form. It would be necessary for him to make direct contact with my friend's father in order to hire him as a lawyer. And he would be responsible for paying the fee, just like everyone else. The fact that his previous attorney was unwilling to handle the case because it appeared to be too hard, and wanted to retire was not something that I was concerned about. Following the act of shutting the door in his face, I instructed him to leave before I contacted the authorities. My mother phoned me after that to let me know that what I was doing was not appropriate. I had the impression that there was nothing further that could be said. But after that she called me. I am very perplexed as to why she has suddenly taken a position of support for my father. But I became really enraged when she informed me that she did not agree with my decision to refrain from assisting him. It was her assertion that my father was a typical human being, just like the rest of us, and that everyone makes errors. It was unfair of me to hold him to an unattainable standard, and to act as if it was unacceptable for him to make mistakes, just due to the fact that he was my father. It was not that I had a problem with the fact that Dad had made a mistake by trusting his wife. Rather, the issue that I had a problem with was the fact that he had trusted his wife more than any other person, including me, his daughter. At the time that he kicked me out of the house, he referred to me as a nasty person and a desperate lowlife. And I still haven't forgotten that he said those things. In spite of the fact that he had brought me up and had a direct familiarity with me, he believed that I was capable of committing such heinous acts. Not only did he come to apologize, but he also came to ask for my assistance, even after 8 years had passed. It is quite unlikely that he would have come forward to express his regrets if he had not required my assistance. It took him 8 years to recognize that he had made a mistake. And here he was, repeating exactly the kind of behavior that I had detested him for. I had loathed him for it. I made an effort to explain this to my mother, but she just couldn't seem to get past the fact that he had accepted responsibility for his actions, regardless of how late it was, and that this was significant. As an alternative to behaving in this manner, she said that I should forgive him, and present myself as a more mature individual since I should most solemnly submit him. The truth is, even if I wanted to, I don't believe I would be able to assist him in any way. I am a friend of his attorney, and I am very certain that I will be able to ask him to talk to his father and collaborate with my father. But I do not believe that I will be able to persuade them to reduce the price of their services. The most qualified divorce attorney in the area does not come at a low cost. Therefore, why would I even want to commit to something that I am not even sure I could accomplish? Because of this, my mother and I ended up having a heated discussion about it, for approximately 30 minutes, and by the time the phone call was over, we were both feeling very aggravated with each other. On the other hand, she simply refused to view things from my perspective, and I was unable to comprehend what she was talking about since I did not believe that she made any sense. At this point, we are also not communicating with one another, and I am pondering whether or not I made a mistake in this regard. Though I don't believe that what I did with my father was particularly inappropriate, the response that I received from my mother is leading me to believe otherwise. I'm not sure if I made the right decision when I declined to assist my estranged father in the divorce proceedings, and consequently I have made the decision that I will not interact with either of my parents. Following the manner in which my father dealt with me, I do not owe him anything. What you guys in the comments are absolutely correct. The fact that he apologized to me a few weeks after discovering the truth is evidence that he would not have apologized if he did not require my assistance. He apologized literally weeks after discovering the truth. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who left a comment. I really needed it. Regarding my mother, I am not really sure what has gotten into her, or why she is siding with my father after such a long period of time during which she has not communicated with him. On the other hand, I am not very interested in learning what is going on. During our conversation, I inquired as to whether or not she was in contact with my father, and whether or not she was talking to him. She responded with a negative. It was revealed to me that she had not communicated with my father for the past 8 years, following the fact that I had been expelled from the boarding house. Nevertheless, he was the one who had attempted to get in touch with her, on the day that I had slammed the door shut squarely in his face. She explained to me that he had been crying, which was the reason why she had chosen to listen to what he had to say. My father is not exactly a particularly emotional man, and it is quite difficult to make him weep, so she wanted to know what was going on that had caused him to contact her. She wanted to know what was going on. She was able to learn the truth about what had transpired when he attempted to apologize to me in this manner. In addition to that, she had not communicated with him in the past 8 years till that point. Considering that she was in the exact same position as I was at the time, I find it difficult to believe that. It would be more challenging for her to forgive him as a result of the divorce that occurred between my parents. They were really good friends, and I think that this event has brought them back together, or whatever has brought them back together. No matter what it is, the response of my mother has made me realize that she doesn't know me as well as I had previously believed she did, and she most certainly does not comprehend what I am saying. In the event that she had, she would not have become angry with me for not immediately forgiving my former father. Whatever the case may be, I'm going to avoid both of them as much as possible. It is not going to be all that tough for me to refrain from communicating with my father, because I have been doing so for the past 8 years already. On the other hand, it is going to be very challenging for me to avoid interacting with my mother. Over the course of a number of years, she has been the only family that I have ever known, and now I have unfortunately lost her as well, despite the fact that I feel terrible about it. There is not much that I can do about it. I will give her a week to apologize for what she said, and how she responded to it. I will give her that time. In the event that she comes to her senses within that time frame, then that would be fantastic. However, if she does not, I am at a loss for what I will do. After that I might have to cut her off forever, and the entire idea of doing so makes me feel a great deal of sadness. Nonetheless, I am unable to stop myself from doing so. It is also necessary for me to watch out for myself. Update 2. Alright, 1 week hasn't yet passed, but my mother did get in touch with me. Regretfully, it was not to atone. I wanted to test if she would talk to me, so I hadn't blocked her on anything. She did. She believed it would be better to personally clear the air. Hence she texted me yesterday, asking whether she could visit me, and have a personal conversation with me. Since I wanted to straighten things out with her as well and I honestly felt she would apologize, I agreed to let her visit. I therefore treated her quite kindly in everything when she came around. She began by saying she had been considering our last chat, and perhaps she hadn't tried to understand me that well. So she was here to give that conversation another go. And she asked me to say the same things, which seemed a little strange, but I did it hoping it would help her understand where I was coming from, and maybe she would find it simple to apologize to me so we could call this once one for good. After I finished expressing my emotions about this whole matter, though Mom informed me she wanted me to have the same conversation with my father now that we had coolly gone over this. He understood my dad needed an explanation for everything, and I could respond with respect instead of slamming doors closed. He persuaded Becca to do the same. Even though he had believed I had taken her money, he did not call the cops on me. It makes no difference that everything was made up. What counts is that he made every effort to shield me, even though he believed I had done the wrong thing. I might so provide him an opportunity to speak with me at least. She would not say no since she knew her daughter had been raised to be kind at heart. But I told her I had no forgiveness in my heart for my father, and she did not know me as well as she believed she did. In the past he treated me like garbage. I have nothing to owe him, not even an apology. Her not apologizing me, even after all of this, infuriated me. I thus advised her to only get in touch with me should she like to apologize following this. I wanted no communication with her otherwise. She then became fidgety and advised me not to act this way as family is all we have at the end of the day. And our life will be horrible if we cannot even rely on them to pardon our mistakes. I asked her to leave as I felt it was just a lot of BS, and told her I did not want to talk to her or address this anymore. She told me at last that she cannot leave as she had promised my father she would get me to speak at me. She couldn't go as she had to live up to her promises, unless I told her I would talk to him at least once. She truly wanted me to get things out with my dad. She said she was truly sorry I felt that both my parents had let me down, but ultimately they were my parents and I should forgive them. She said she did not want to lose me. That counts for something since the few mistakes they made were negligible compared to all they had done well in the past. Her even stating that seemed absurd to me. It was her error. I informed her that she had promised my father she could not even know she could live up to, and it was not my duty to see she kept her word. Once more, I urged her to go, but then she told me she cannot since my dad was waiting to be summoned and inside from outside in the car. She wanted not to disappoint him. I at last snapped and began to yell at my mother. This was violated really seriously. She had taken the liberty of bringing my father here, confident she could sway my opinion, but I had made it quite obvious to her I did not want to talk to him. I naturally lost my cool and began yelling at her. I said I was done with her, and that she was a horrible mother. She started crying, but it made no difference to me since I was enraged. She kept saying she was sorry about all of this, but I simply kept begging her to leave. I was not in the mood to hear it. After around 15 minutes of dispute, she at last won. I screamed at her as she was leaving and warned her that I would call the cops on her or my father should they ever return. I blocked her then, and I believe I should discuss with a lawyer obtaining a protective order against these individuals should they choose to pay me another visit. Update 3. Alright, so something literally crazy occurred today and I have no idea how to approach anyone about it. I am here to discuss this since I truly need to get this off my mind. Then Becca and Alexa arrived, and that is not even the most wild aspect of what transpired today. I became enraged when I found they were standing outside my door. I advised them to leave right away, and I even called the cops number. Becca, however, informed me she was there to tell me the truth about my father and specifically why he needed my help, not to bother me. It was good to know she hadn't changed in 8 years. She was exactly as unpleasant and rude as before. Originally I had no desire in talking to her, so I told her whatever she had to say. I was not interested. She then remarked, however, that if I understood what she was here to tell me and could explain why my mother had been abruptly on my dad's side following years of silence, I would most definitely be intrigued. Apparently I'm not going to lie. That surprised me since I assumed she would not know about any of this. After some thought, I asked her in as I truly wanted to know what was going on. She insisted though, that she was merely coming to tell me the truth and would be leaving without even entering my house. Her daughter told me that a few weeks ago her parents had told her father the truth about the incident that had happened 8 years ago, just outside my door. They started a furious argument about it, and he resolved to file for divorce. She had been arguing with her parents since she stopped monthly paying them money as she used to. She became a little too avaricious, in case someone wanted to know exactly what they had been fighting over. Even my father wasn't providing the kind of allowance she desired. She started some investigation after her father had decreased her allowance without explanation and discovered that my dad was seeing my mother. She understood he had been conserving money, as he most likely intended to be leaving her. She thus chose to remain with him, and subsequently apply for a divorce under her own terms finally. But her dad discovered the truth before she could act, therefore their whole conflict took place. They both discovered their own actual hues. Under normal conditions, my dad could have easily ended our marriage, without handing Becca anything. But Becca had not worked in the past 10 years, and since he had also been cheating and disloyal to her, she wrote a petition that would help her. He was not comfortable with that, hence they were battling valiantly. She was telling me all of this because apparently my father had threatened her on the phone, a few days ago, and advised her to back off since I was supposed to forward him to the Vort of Law's attorney and the poison subsequently she would be screwed. He was obviously lying, but Becca wanted not to take that chance. She had come to tell me the truth, though in a sense I was relieved that I at last had an explanation for why my mother had been acting so strangely about my father. I was genuinely stunned that all of this was occurring. Becca said it was up to me whether I wanted to help my dad or not once she had told me everything. She then walked away. She had been of some real benefit to me for the first time in her life, and I'm appreciative of that. I will never be able to maintain contact with my parents once again after this either. It astounds me that my mother tried to gaslight me into thinking my dad deserved a second shot for her own self-serving needs. My parents most certainly fit each other. They are a match made in heaven. Not being in their life anymore makes me happy. Now that I live alone, I would like to thank my lucky stars for having the wise decision not to give any of them another chance. Update 4. Hi, many wanted to know how things were doing with me since I last blogged here some few months ago. I'm really pleased on my own. It's been going rather well. Though I do miss my mother sometimes, I remind myself of how she deceived me, and it helps me to cope with her absence a little bit. A few relatives told me that my dad is now back with my mother once more. His divorce was settled a few weeks ago. I'm not very interested in understanding exactly what he lost in the divorce either. A few of my cousins have been invited to the couple's wedding in a few weeks. Though I don't really care, they wanted me to know about it, in case I wanted to show up and straighten things out with them. I most definitely want nothing right with them. Right now life is as it should be. I'm happier and better off living alone. So I'm really satisfied. From neglect to independence, my dad spent everything on my cousin. But karma left him broke. And I finally found my own way. My dad chose my cousin over me, funded his future, and ruined mine. But karma left him drowning in regret as I built my own life. I never imagined that I would be sharing this story, but here I am. I'm a 28-year-old man who has had a rather difficult life, particularly when it comes to family. My mother passed away while giving birth to me, which, I suppose, set the tone for the relationship I had with my father. He never really moved past her death, and always treated me as if I were the reason she was gone. Naturally, I have no memories of my mother, but I've heard many stories from relatives about how thrilled she was to have me. She had always longed to become a mother, and had faced years of fertility struggles before finally conceiving me. This knowledge only makes the whole situation more heartbreaking. She finally achieved her dream, only to have it tragically cut short. As I was growing up, our home was filled with photographs of my mother. My father kept everything just as she had left it, almost as if the house were a shrine to her memory. Her clothes remained hanging in the closet, and her books still lined the shelves. It felt as though I was living with the ghost of a woman I would never have the chance to know. Sometimes I would sneak into their room just to touch her belongings, trying desperately to forge some sort of connection with the mother I never met. My relationship with my father, however, was entirely different. He was there in the physical sense, but emotionally, he might as well have been on a different planet. He went through the motions of parenting, ensuring that I was fed, clothed, and made it to school on time, but there was never any warmth or affection. No hugs, no words of love, not even a simple pat on the back for a job well done. I always felt like an outsider within my own home. Most days my father would barely even look at me, let alone engage in conversation. When he did speak to me, it was usually to criticize or compare me to my cousin Jake. Jake's father, my uncle, died in a car accident when Jake was 7, so my father kinda took him under his wing. I still remember the day we received the news about my uncle's death. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, working on homework, when the phone rang. My father answered and I watched as his face crumpled while he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. That was the first and only time I ever saw my father cry. After hanging up the phone, he sat down heavily at the table and stared off into space for what felt like hours. Jake began to spend a lot more time at our house after that. I was excited at first. I thought that having another kid around might make things more fun and might even help my dad open up a bit. But it didn't take me long to understand that Jake's presence made my relationship with my dad even worse. He often asked, "Why can't you be more like Jake?" Or Jake would never do that. It seemed like Jake was the son he had always wanted, and I was just there. Jake was sporty, friendly and charming, which I wasn't. Jake was the life of the party, while I was shy and liked to read. It was delicious for my dad. I worked really hard to make my dad happy. It never seemed like enough. I tried to learn about his interests, got good grades and joined every sports team. My dad thought Jake could never do a bad thing. He would compliment Jake on the smallest things, but I never got any credit for my own accomplishments. I won a science fair at school when I was about 12 years old. My project was a complicated model of the solar system that could move. I worked on it for weeks. I could hardly wait to tell my dad. I thought this would finally make him happy. His laughter and talk with Jake about a football game made me laugh when I got home. I told him I won, but he just nodded and went back to talking to Jake. It felt like I wasn't there at all. It gets worse as we age because of the bias. People always made fun of Jake and me because we were in the same grade. I did better in school than Jake did in high school, but my dad would always find ways to downplay my achievements. "Well, Jake's got more important things to think about than just grades," he would say. During one parent-teacher meeting, my English teacher raved about an essay I'd written. She told my dad it was one of the best papers she had ever seen from a kid my age, and that she thought I would make a great writer. My dad just grunted and asked if this would help me get a big grant for sports. The teacher looked confused. And I was so embarrassed that my face burned. In spite of this, there remained a part of me that still yearned for changes. I reasoned that perhaps everything would be fine if only I could locate the appropriate thing, the magic key unlocking my dad's adoration. I pursued that unattainable dream all of my childhood, and during my teenage years. When it came time for college, the true kickback was I had pushed my ass, enrolled at a decent university, and been ready to launch my future. Though I knew money would be limited, I reasoned my dad would contribute at least somewhat. Boy, I guess I was mistaken. The day I overheard my dad on the phone with Jake informing him he would pay for his whole college tuition will always be with me. My pulse dropped. My dad looked at me like I was insane when I asked if he could also assist me out. "Jake needs it more than I can afford to pay for both of you," he remarked. That's exactly how my college dreams vanished. I attempted to make it work nevertheless. Working evenings and weekends, I had a part-time job at a nearby diner. I applied for every scholarship I could locate, but it was not enough. The strain was intolerable. I was juggling my classes, working enough hours to pay for things and still finding time to study and sleep. There has to be a give. After the first semester, I found myself having to drop out. On my own, I couldn't afford it. The part-time work I could find hardly covered tuition. Jake was living it at a famous university, completely on my dad's money. Meanwhile, he would share images of his elegant dorm room, his spring break travels, the new laptop my dad had purchased for him for college on social media. Every post was like a knife turning in my gut. That moment was the breaking point for me. I gathered my belongings and left home, cutting off all contact with both my father and Jake. It was incredibly painful, but I knew I had to escape that toxic environment. I could no longer bear to live in the shadow of my deceased mother and the cousin who had somehow replaced me in my father's heart. The past few years have been challenging, to say the least. I've taken on various odd jobs, doing whatever I could to make ends meet. I've waited tables, worked in construction, pulled night shifts at gas stations, anything to ensure I had a roof over my head and food to eat. It has been difficult, especially when I see updates from Jake on social media about his incredible college experiences, and the great job he secured after graduation. But despite everything, I'm gradually building a life for myself on my own terms. I now have a decent job, not something extravagant, but it covers the bills. I'm working as a manager at a local bookstore. It's not the career I envisioned, but I find solace in being surrounded by books all day. In addition, I'm taking night classes at the community college, working toward the degree I've always wanted. It's not an easy journey, but at least I'm making it on my own. Along the way, I've made some great friends, people who accept me for who I am, not for who they want me to be. They have become the family I never truly had. We have weekly game nights, go on camping trips when we can afford it, and support each other through thick and thin. It's far from perfect, but it's mine, and that makes all the difference. I thought I had left all that family drama behind me, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Yesterday, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I was stunned to hear my dad's voice on the other end. It had been 3 years since we last spoke, and now he was reaching out for help. I'm not entirely sure how to feel about this, but one thing is certain: I am no longer that kid desperate for his approval. Update 1. It's been a week since my dad's unexpected call, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Speaking with him on the phone brought back a plethora of memories, the majority of which were not good. But his voice was different. Older, more worn out, more desperate. He began with small talk, asking how I was doing. It felt awkward and forced, as if he was trying to pretend the last few years hadn't happened. Then he got to the real reason for his call. He needed money, and a lot of it. At first I was too shocked to respond. This was the man who had never given me a dime for college, who had chosen my cousin over me time and time again. And now he was asking me for financial help. Oh, the irony was not lost on me. When I finally found my voice, I asked him why he was coming to me. My chance really owns me. What about Jake, his golden boy? Shouldn't he be the one to help out? My dad fell silent for a moment, then mumbled something about Jake being busy with his new job, and not having the means to help right now. I couldn't help but laugh. After years of being told how much better Jake was, how he deserved the opportunities I didn't, now I was supposed to be the one to step up. I made it clear to my dad exactly what I thought about that idea. I suggested he go talk to Jake instead, since he had always been the favorite anyway. There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. Then my dad started to say something about how he regretted some of the choices he'd made, how he wanted to make things right. But I cut him off. I told him it was too little, too late. I'd spent years trying to earn his love and approval, and now that he needed something from me, he was ready to play the remorseful father. I ended the call shortly after that. I experienced a range of feelings as soon as I hung up. I turned him away, and part felt bad about it, since he was still my father. But a bigger part of me felt relieved. For the first time, I had stood up for myself against him. I didn't cave into the need for his approval that had driven me for so long. The next few days were tough. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I had done the right thing. I thought about all the times I needed aid, and he wasn't there. Sure, it was the college tuition, but it was also the little moments when a child needed their father. School activities, girl advice, and learning to drive. He had been missing throughout. I remembered my first heartbreak when I was 16. Her name was Sarah, and I thought she was the one. We had been dating for 6 months when she broke up with me for one of the football players. When he barely looked up when I walked in. I stood there for a moment hoping he would ask what was wrong, but he just grunted and told me I was blocking the screen. I went to my room and cried myself to sleep that night. Or the time I got my driver's license. Most of my friends' dads had taught them how to drive, but not mine. I had to beg my neighbor Mr. Johnson to teach me. When I finally passed the test, I came home excited to share the news. My dad was in the garage, working on his car with Jake. I showed them my new license. Jake congratulated me, but my dad just nodded and went back to explaining something about the engine to Jake. I don't think he ever let me drive his car. Another thing that made me think was what kind of trouble he was in to need my money. My dad was always very proud, almost too much. It has to be important for him to reach out in this way. Even with everything, I was still a little worried about him. But then I thought about all the times I had been worried about my own future, because I wasn't making enough money since I had to quit college. What did he care about then? I had to work things out by myself, which I did. I made my own life without his help. Why should I help him right now? I remembered the year I lived on my own after moving out. In order to start over, I moved to a new place where no one knew me. I got any job I could find and found a tiny studio room that I could barely afford. I cleaned during the day and worked as a bartender at night. I was always tired, but I was able to get through it on my own. When I got home from work at the bar, some nights my feet hurt and smelled like smoke and beer. I wondered if I had made a mistake. I could have put my pride aside, stayed home, and tried to work things out with my dad. But then I remembered being judged all the time, and never feeling good enough, and I knew I had made the right choice. I started to feel better about my choice as the days went by. I understood that by not giving in to his request, I was finally giving him a handle on things. I wasn't the same kid he used to be able to ignore and push around. Today I'm an adult, I choose for myself, and I don't owe him anything. I couldn't help but be interested though. What had exactly caused this to happen? What happened that Jake, the perfect child, couldn't or wouldn't help? There were times when I wanted to find out more about what was going on with my dad and my cousin, but I hesitated. Did I really want to open that can of worms? Was it worth potentially stirring up all that old pain and resentment? I thought about getting in touch with Jake's mom, my aunt. Even though she was sometimes cold, she was always nice to me. She might understand what's going on. The last time I saw her though, was at a family get-together right before I left for work. She gave Jake a big hug and told him she was proud of him for getting into such a good college. She only gave me a weak smile and a pat on the shoulder when it was my turn to leave. I made up my mind not to call her. I'm still not sure what to do next as I write this report. A part of me wants to forget about the past and keep focused on my own growth in life. On the other hand, I can't help but wonder what's going on between my dad and Jake. Now that I think about it, only time will tell if I decide to look into more or not. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. Despite my initial hesitation, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to find out why my dad suddenly needed help, and why Jake wasn't stepping up. I started by reaching out to a few family friends who were still in touch with my dad. At first they were reluctant to share much, but eventually I pieced together a pretty clear picture of what had transpired on. I called Mrs. Peterson first. She had been my mom's best friend and had always been kind to me growing up. What she seemed surprised to hear from me, but was happy to chat. After some small talk, I steered the conversation toward my dad and Jake. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then sighed deeply before starting to fill me in. It turns out that my dad had gone all in on supporting Jake, far beyond just paying for his college tuition. He had helped Jake with the down payment on a house, bought him a car, and even invested in a business venture Jake wanted to pursue. To do all this, my dad had taken out loans and maxed out his credit cards. He was drowning in debt, all for the sake of giving Jake the life he thought he deserved. Mrs. Peterson told me about a conversation she had with my dad a few years back. He had been bragging about Jake's successes, talking about how he was going to be a big-shot businessman one day. When she asked about me, my dad had just shrugged and said he hoped I was doing okay. The indifference in his voice had shocked her. Next, I reached out to my old neighbor, Mr. Johnson, the one who taught me how to drive. He had always been observant and filled me in on some of the more recent developments. Apparently Jake had convinced my dad to invest in a startup he was launching with some college friends. It was some kind of tech company, but Mr. Johnson wasn't clear on the details. What he did know was that my dad had remortgaged the house to get the money for the investment. The kicker? Jake's new job, the one my dad had proudly boasted about, wasn't going as well as expected. The business venture had flopped, and Jake was now struggling to make ends meet himself. When my dad turned to him for help with the mounting debt, Jake apparently told him he couldn't spare anything right now. Mr. Johnson had overheard an argument between my dad and Jake just a few weeks ago. Jake had come over, driving a flashy new car, and my dad confronted him about the failed business and the money he'd invested. Jake had yelled something about how it wasn't his fault the market had changed, and that he'd pay my dad back when he could. Then he peeled out of the driveway, leaving my dad standing there, looking utterly defeated. I have to admit, a part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. After years of being compared to Jake, constantly hearing how I didn't measure up, it turned out that the golden child wasn't so golden after all. My dad had placed all his hopes and resources into Jake, and now those hopes had crumbled. But mostly I just felt tired of the endless drama, the lingering pain and the constant what-ifs. I thought about how different things could have been if my dad had chosen to destine me the way he did in Jake. Maybe I would have finished college, and perhaps I'd be in a completely different career today. But then again, maybe I wouldn't have learned the invaluable lessons I did about self-reliance and perseverance. I remembered the tough times after dropping out of college, how I juggled multiple jobs, often scraping by on ramen noodles and cheap coffee. I thought about the long nights I spent studying after exhausting shifts, driven by the determination to improve myself, even without the benefit of a formal education. It had been a hard journey, but it shaped me into the person I am today. I wasn't sure if I should tell my dad what I had learned. After some thought, I chose to text him. I told him I knew what was going on with Jake and the bill. I didn't offer to help, but I also didn't brag. What I really said was that I hoped he could see now that the decisions he made had effects on both of us. After a few hours, he answered. He said sorry and a lot of things in a long message. He told me that he knew he had been unfair to me, and that his grief over my mom's death had made him lose his temper. He talked about how proud my mom would have been of the man I'd become, even though he wasn't a great dad. He asked if we could get together and talk. I thought about that message for a long time before I decided what to do. I still had a little boy inside me that wanted his dad's love, so there was a part of me that wanted to say yes. I imagined a time when we'd get together, talk things out, and our relationship would be fixed magically. But as an adult who has had to work hard for everything, I knew better. I reflected on all the important milestones in my life that my father had missed, like my high school graduation, where I scanned the audience, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face, only to feel the sting of disappointment. I thought about my first apartment, which I furnished with second-hand items and a lot of determination, and the promotion I recently received at the bookstore, a moment I had no one to share with except my friends. In the end, I decided to respond to my father, letting him know that I was not ready for a meeting. While I acknowledged his apology, I made it clear that words alone could not erase the years of neglect and favoritism I had endured. I expressed my need for time and space, and I told him that he needed to respect that boundary. I also made it abundantly clear that I would not be bailing him out financially. His decisions had brought him to this point, just as my decisions had led me to where I am now. It was not my responsibility to fix the mistakes he had made. As I sit here writing this update, I feel a sense of relief. Not happiness exactly, but as if a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. For so long I carried the burden of trying to earn my father's love, constantly questioning what was wrong with me that made him favor Jake. Now I realize it was never about me at all. It was about his own unresolved issues, his inability to cope with loss and grief. I am uncertain about what the future holds for my relationship with my father, or whether there will be any relationship at all. Perhaps one day we will have a genuine conversation about everything that has transpired. Perhaps not. For now I am focusing on my own life and personal growth. I am continuing with my night classes, diligently working toward that degree. I am also building relationships with people who appreciate me for who I am. Just last week I helped my friend Sarah, not Sarah from high school, move into her new apartment. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, it dawned on me that these connections, this chosen family, are what truly matter, not the approval of someone who was never able to recognize my worth. Life is not always easy, but I am forging my own path. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I am confident that I will face it on my own terms, with the strength I have developed through years of self-reliance.